system unfolding. Military science fiction podcast. Untold stories every Wednesday. Military science fiction podcast. Discussion, interviews, reviews, and rants. Military science fiction podcast.
Oh, I've got chip in my teeth.
That's a great way to start. All right, wait. Welcome, everybody. That one is definitely going into the video.
Yeah, buddy.
Yeah. Today we're talking about, my mind just went blank. We're talking about fighting in extreme situations. So this could be...
We're talking about alien fungus growing on your face. No.
Alien fungus. I'm for it. I think eventually we'll have that symbiotic relationship and we'll just enjoy that fungus. It'll eat things that fall out of your mouth.
Either that or we'll turn into that dude from Pirates, Dead Man's Chest or whatever. He's got the tentacles and stuff.
So what started this conversation was like basically combat in extreme. I mean, combat is always an extreme situation, depending, but you know, remote situations, asteroids, debris fields, planetoids.
Extreme environments.
Extreme environments. That's the word that I blanked out on.
Worst environment imaginable. That's all you had to say.
Yeah.
Worst environment.
Worst environment imaginable.
There you go. So anytime...
Salt Lake City in the summer.
That's not the worst environment I can imagine. A Porta-John in Iraq. How's that? That's the worst environment possible.
No bueno.
Worst environment in the United States. Any desert city in the summer.
A kindergarten class after you've given them all cupcakes.
Kindergarten class after you give them all cupcakes laced with E. coli.
Ooh, nice.
That'd take a while.
I mentioned Salt Lake City because I was just there, and in the summer you get a lot of it's really hard on the allergies.
Yeah,
as Jeff can tell you.
You guys got to stay away from the Willamette
And the
Valley.
air quality here sucks. I mean,
Yeah, they call my homeland the Valley of Death because we have the highest pollen count in the world most of the time. So,
I am trying to get Rebecca on board with moving to Flagstaff, Arizona. It's up in the mountains, never above 80, never below 20, no allergies. And I just got to find proof that there are no scorpions there.
Scorpions and tarantulas.
There's no tarantulas in Flagstaff. I spent a lot of time in Flagstaff. There's no tarantulas.
There we go. We're moving. We're moving to Flagstaff, people.
yeah. There are definitely scorpions in El Paso, but El Paso is very different. It's close
Well,
to...
there may be scorpions somewhere around Flagstaff because I did
Rick,
get
quiet. We already won.
I know that's the thing. We're
I
not
did get
we're not
stung
gonna...
by one at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, which is near Flagstaff, but you know.
Nearer.
Yeah.
So we're talking about extreme environments and what it takes to fight in extreme environment. And as always, it's going to be from our perspective of like the universes that we've created and we've written in, some published, some not. And also like, why would you want to, what would be the purpose of fighting in an extreme environment? Why would you be doing it? You know,
I've actually written a few scenes in different books fighting in extreme environments. Usually they wind up doing it because there's something out there they need.
Right.
Like a ship they want to capture or supplies that are stored there, something like that.
odds are one side of the two sides that are fighting doesn't want to be there.
Oh, and a good reason to be fighting an asteroid, since we brought them up. Asteroids are great weapons if you get them moving and send them towards somebody else's planet. So maybe you want to get on that asteroid, take control of whatever propulsion device they've put on it to make it move and change its trajectory.
Right.
Blow it up.
Seize that.
No, you blow it up and the fragments will still hit your planet. You got to change its trajectory.
I mean, blow up the propulsion device.
Yeah,
Right,
you
to
could,
stop.
but if it's already fired enough to get it moving towards your planet, you're still screwed.
But I mean, the whole idea of that, you've got a low gravity environment, you've got an extreme environment, you're already in vacuum, but you could have radiation, you could have, there's a lot of interesting things you could do with that to make it as hard as possible for your team that is getting into that environment. And then that's the cool thing about it. It's not just hard for them, it's hard for whoever it is they're fighting as well.
It's hard for the writer.
Or the defender.
So let's start off with a discussion about there's an asteroid that's got no atmosphere. probably no gravity or very low gravity. If it's under propulsion, it's going to have some gravity, obviously from the propulsion. What are the kinds of things that you would need SF wise in order for troops to be able to land and fight?
You have to have man maneuvering units on your suits,
Right.
just to keep from floating off into space.
I've got a sequence in Weaponized that takes place on basically a massive asteroid mining station depot, and it's in an asteroid belt, but it's built on an asteroid that was fractured and cracked in half, and so there's this big chasm kind of that goes down into the middle of the asteroid, and the station is built in that chasm. And I kind of pulled a Star Wars-ish type tech where the opening is covered by a force field that you can phase through if your ship has the right frequency or whatever, right? And it's controlled by the air traffic control. And in this, I don't really go into tech in this instance a lot in the story, but they have like artificial gravity throughout, like in their ships and stations and stuff. So there is artificial gravity on this. But the cool part of the set piece I have is that the main it's basically a big city, but the main concourse it wraps around the interior, so you can look up and see through the force field and see like the space and all of that. But of course, then disaster happens and battle starts happening, and in this particular instance, the shields go down, like the main shield goes down, and then everybody that's inside is trapped inside when the blast door is shut and the atmosphere seals in. And then you've got to deal with, like, how do we get outside? How do we get our ships? Because they're all out there. And I made it as easy as I could to make it as cool as I could without having to deal with like actual like what do we do for gravity or what do you do with the zero G atmospheres and stuff like that. Again, I'm one of the more rule of cool type mill sci-fi writers than actual, like, is it plausible? You know what I mean?
If I could interject something, it's a tiny bit off topic, but it's on topic with what Josh said. As a writer of science fiction, it is so much easier if you invent some kind of artificial gravity, because just as a writer, you're going to have to keep track in every single scene. Right. Okay, what gravity are we under? Are they boosting? Are they spinning? Are we in an atmosphere? Are we in zero G? Or are we in microgravity? It's just
it changes everything about. I mean, really, when you think about how your stomach feels in an elevator. You know, like being.
Well, you've got to mention that every time.
Right. Exactly.
If it's microgravity, oh, my stomach feels weird. My sinuses are stuffed up.
And bear in mind, you know, a lot of people do spin gravity, like in 2001 Space Station, whatever. But the reality of that gravity is that's never 1G.
Mm-hmm.
In movies, they make it seem like it is, like in The Martian. Because
there's a reason for that is because it's really expensive to simulate
zero G
low gravity.
You either have to green screen it or you have to take them up on the plane to shoot all the scenes.
Yeah. So,
but spin gravity, in reality,
you can get one gravity, but you just have to have a bigger.
And so most times, if you're in a smaller ship or a space station, you're not going to have spin gravity of 1G. It's going to be like 0.5G, and that is a whole other thing.
If that, it mostly. Yeah. I heard that they've determined that about a quarter of a G would be enough to keep you basically healthy for a trip like that.
Because our bodies require gravity to function. FYI, Spoiler alert.
Right.
So when I was doing Grimm's War, I rule cooled it and just hand waved. It's pretty much the only thing I've hand waved in the whole book is the ships have artificial gravity because they have a secondary grav coil that controls the gravity, and the two grav coils constantly fight each other for gravity. So you got one grav coil that gives them constant 1G this way, and it's offsetting the gravity of the other directions. And so that's why you get the people leaning and stuff like that in the ship, a la submarine warfare. Spoiler alert. But if you don't do that, like if you're going to do, this is one of my beefs with some books is that they'll throw some they'll throw their hands at like, oh, they have acceleration gravity, and the rest of the time they have mag boots and doesn't really impact anything, and they just go along as if everything is just totally normal. And you know, it's like, no, that's not. Like, okay, so you have mag boots, that's great. Everything still floats. You know, I mean, it's just like even using your guns is going to be different in space. So yeah, like Rick says, do yourself a favor, unless you're not having a lot of stuff in space. If the vast majority of your stuff is going to happen on the planet, give yourself some kind of artificial gravity.
I did like a compromise with the Drop Trooper universe. Their artificial gravity only works when they're in transition space, like when they're going FTL, because there is no anti-gravity or artificial gravity in our space. It just doesn't work. But you go in this other universe, this other dimension, and you can make it work. My first attempt at it's just hand waving artificial gravity. I said that they bombarded antimatter with hyperphotons, which I thought sounded
Hyperphoton.
plausible enough that nobody would care that it's totally made up.
I know with in Grims of War, when they've got to fight in places that are like, I had at one point, I had them in the Raptor suits on the outside of a space station, obviously no gravity there. And somebody had, the whole reason I did that, not the whole reason I did that, but one of the reasons I did that was somebody asked me why the Raptor suits had claws on the feet, because I made a point in the first time they were mentioned that they had claws on their feet and hands. And I was like, well, if they ever have to go someplace where they have to hold on, metal fingers aren't great for holding on to things, but you know, clawed, you know, raptor hands basically with, you know, claws like a, you know, with opposable thumbs, fantastic for that. And so when they're walking on the outside of the space station, their feet come down, lock in on the metal, puncture the metal and lock in, and they just, you know, like
and even one thing, you know, think about an extreme environment. It's like mag boots or grabbing with claws. Like you forget about the motion of that, like having to be very deliberate about how you move. Like you can't disconnect one boot before you know, have locked in the other. And so
Yeah.
because the other thing I think you might get caught up in riding a firefight or just riding anything cool, and you forget about that and how tiring it is, and you know, just remember like the last time when you were a kid wearing a snowsuit, having to walk through snow, you know, totally overburdened by whatever it is you're wearing, and how that is just exhausts every part of you. You know, and then slap a ruck, you know, an 80-pound ruck on you and weapons and everything else. And I think for me, when it gets to an extreme environment, it's like remembering all of that and communicating it and how the people are interacting with each other.
Well,
And
another thing you got to remember, even in microgravity or free fall or whatever you want to call it, you don't have weight, but you still have momentum.
and
Mass is mass. And if you are moving forward and you've got like a buttload of mass on you, it still takes a lot more effort to stop yourself or to change directions. And people forget that when they go and they have scenes in zero gravity or free fall or whatever, microgravity, whatever the most technically accurate term is. They'll have people moving things that are really large, and they don't think, hey, moving it's okay, but how do you stop it? How do you change its direction? Because that's not as easy.
And your bones don't really hold up to that as well as you would hope.
Right.
Has everybody seen the new Mission Impossible movie? Like, I don't want to get into spoiler alerts, but there's a whole like
I have not.
sequence.
The new one?
Yeah, the new one. Like it
I'm
really
probably not going to see it though, because the last one was so utterly disappointing to me.
Yeah.
So
I think from
I
what
haven't heard this one being any better. It hasn't heard it's any better. So
they have definite extreme, like there's one whole sequence in a Russian submarine, you know, however many meters under the ocean in the Arctic, and they're just like stacking problem on top of problem on top of problem to the point where you're like, how would that even work? And you know, getting to what Rick just said, I was thinking about like, you know, I've dived, and one of the biggest things you forget about is your tank, right? And if you're trying to get through anything or wear the tank or deal with the tank, and he's just like navigating torpedoes and not even seeming to be aware of this bulky rebreather suit he's wearing.
Navigating torpedoes?
Yeah, like there's this whole thing where torpedoes are like rolling around inside the submarine.
Oh.
I mean, the whole time I'm thinking about like, how does pressure work in that situation?
you guys, I mean, I know James and Rick, you'll know this, but Josh, I'm not sure how Air Force vacation time works with boot camp, but when we were doing rappelling training, right, you had all your gear on And when you went over the lip, like everything in his brother got caught on the lip. And then you had to remember the sequence in which to go down, right? Like if you did the sequence wrong, you could fall, and you got 75 pounds of gear on you. You remember, like, you got the rope, and you got the rope in one hand to slow you and the rope in the other hand to guide you, and you have the jump at the right time and stuff like that. You do that enough, it becomes, second nature. And so I think when you're talking about troops in space, not like special agents like Ethan Hunt who do the impossible, but like if you've got troops like Drop Trooper, or you got troops in Raptor, or whatever spacesuits you guys use, they're not going to be like, that's not going to be like that stuff is going to be the least of your problems trying to communicate to the audience, because they've trained in that. Like, what is the number one thing that is going to kill your soldiers on an asteroid belt, or on an asteroid, or an extreme hazardous environment where the atmosphere is either toxic or there is none? Like, what is the number one thing that's going to kill the people the most?
Atmosphere?
The suit puncture, right? The suit being punctured. Have you guys seen?
That's the number one thing that would kill you.
Because you wouldn't have to.
Like how crappy are the suits? That's a big point to think about.
Well, I was going to say,
no, but I mean, like, for instance,
if you have suits that are built for use out, in harsh environments, they're going to have some kind of self-sealing features.
They are, but I mean, like, something that would wound you would be a lot more dangerous than something that than it would be otherwise. So having your suit punctured sometimes in a way that maybe can't be self-sealed, like for instance the ELF suits that the crews of the Interceptor wear, sometimes the breaches are so violent that even though the suit does eventually seal itself, it takes too long.
Yeah.
And that would
be
a thing that would
Jeff,
be more
have you seen the those suits that they have that work by putting pressure on your body rather than sealing you inside an atmosphere?
I have seen that. It's pretty cool. It's like a spongy material that
yeah.
It also acts as like it distributes impact throughout over your whole body, as opposed to
I don't mean necessarily that one, but the one I'm talking about, your skin is a really good way to hold in oxygen, and it just puts like this really tight material, like a unitard looking thing, over your skin to put pressure on it, and it doesn't need it. I mean, if you get like a hole in it, it's as long as it's not like something that compromises the whole suit, it would still. I mean, you would have a sealed helmet, but the helmet would not be. In other words, the helmet wouldn't be connected to the inside of the suit, so the air would not be coming up through the helmet. So you would, if you got a hole in your suit, you wouldn't necessarily have your lungs explode.
You can also scratch, your butt when you need to. That's the great
thing. That's one thing I did in a lot of my earlier books. Everybody on a spaceship wears this suit all the time, and in an emergency, you have like a collapsible helmet you can put on, and it makes the base layer for when you want to do extravehicular activities. You put on various types of suits over this suit, like armor plating if you want to go somewhere there might be micrometeorites, or insulation.
That's a really cool. I had seen that and I completely forgot about it. I do with my suits, it's sort of similar to the ELF suits. They all use they all have like an nanite reservoir that they use for self-sealing and for medical distribution, for basic repairs. They have medical suites and stuff like that. So the ELF suits in Grimm's War are kind of like the base, and then the Marines use this thing called space armor, which is like a hardened armor that they put over the ELF suits, but it's not powered. And then they've got the Raptor suits, and the Raptor suits are their whole other thing. It's all self-contained. But unlike Drop Trooper, where like you have the sort of hunchback gorilla sort of suits, the Raptor suits are more like mini mechas, because their arms are not like the claws of the Raptor suit are not the hands of the operator. The operator actually operates it from joysticks and foot pedals. And
by the way, the claws of the Raptor would be a great name for a short story in your universe.
Would. Claws of the Raptor. I'm have to do that, especially since how popular the Raptor suits are. Everybody seems to really love them.
You know,
They're
one
they're
thing
kind of like a Robotech type thing. It sounds like.
almost.
I love Robotech. So, if I could get away with writing a Robotech story with like Veritech fighters, oh man.
I love the Veritech fighters.
I contacted the rights holder and told her, I was like, listen, I've sold this many books. I will happily write a Robotech book series. But she's not doing anything with the rights. She didn't get back to me, but her dad died and she's just not doing anything with the rights at the moment.
I
Kind of
think
makes me want to
we've really
put
talked
that
about.
kind of armor and weaponized it, and at some point, just
For a
'cause
small licensing fee, you can use the Raptor armor.
well, mine would be completely like implant mental control without any physical interaction with the suit. They would just be in it in some kind of like some kind of
Cocoon.
coffin type. Yeah, exactly.
Have you ever played Eve?
No.
Yep. And
Eve,
they have the
the
capsules.
operators in Eve, they're in that little egg.
Yep. I loved Eve. It's still going strong.
Yeah, every 10 years or so, I stop back in and remember why I hate it.
100%.
I heard it's a
100%.
spreadsheet. It's like playing a
That's-
spreadsheet in space.
Another thing about you were talking about suits. For instance, the drop trooper armor and drop trooper, when they're in an atmosphere, they can run air through their reactor and use that for their jump jets. But if you're in space, you're going to have to carry reaction mass on board with you, and that's gonna have a limited. It's not you're not gonna be able to carry very much.
So speaking of
range.
Robotech, Rick, you'll love this. In Know Thy Enemy, they have to. I do this. Whenever I bring out the Raptor suits, I try not to just have them be Raptor suits. I try to have them do something really cool. Like the first time you see them, they're mounted on the wings of a Corsair and they're fired in space like a missile toward a space station. And Know Thy Enemy, they're sitting in the boat bay and the doors are open and they're in orbit. And the plan is they're going to jump out of the boat bay and fall onto this planet and land. And to do that, they have these special twin rocket engine backpacks mounted on the back. And I got that idea from the Super Veritech. Remember that? It had the boosters on the back.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Of the Veritech fighter, and for it to break orbit or whatever. I forget exactly why they had that. And so yeah, they ended up using that to go into to basically to stop themselves from crashing into the planet. And so you need something, because no suit at our tech level anyways, no suit is going to be like an Iron Man suit where you're going to be able to go into orbit and come down from orbit. Though I am working on a new book series where the guy is inside a multi-layered what's that one molecule thick graphene that's been layered on top of each other over and over again. So technically, like you spoiler alert, he's been told they could survive a fall from orbit, so that may or may not come into play later on in the series.
Nice.
Your suit can survive a fall from orbit. You, however, will be.
You might not.
Well, his bones have been reinforced with tungsten carbide, and his
what about his organs?
He's got like a Kevlar weave web around his organs and just all this other stuff that's been done to him without.
I was just dealing with one of my enhanced commandos, an Archangel, and I was thinking about the way to kill them because he was fighting somebody just like himself. And all that stuff you can reinforce, you can put bone armor, the one thing you can reinforce your skull, but you can't keep your brain from getting smashed against the inside of your skull.
Or your organs being flattened on the inside or whatever it is you're armoring with them.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest problems I had with I think it was Civil War, Captain America Civil War, when Brody fell out of the sky and landed in the dirt. And the only thing that happened was he broke his back. Man, everything would have been smushed. His organs would have been smushed. His brain would have been smushed. Everything would have been just goo.
People survive jumping out of planes.
I saw people survive a fall like that once.
Really?
Yeah, no, people survive jumping out of airplanes and their parachute's not opening. It's probably 25% of the time.
Yeah.
And that feels like magic when that happens, because you're always kind of like what? How?
Yeah, right. I mean, it's always
they weren't happy.
Yeah,
survive.
like they bounce up and been like, "I'll do that again." No, but I mean, yeah, only his back broken was kind of funny. Like he would have had severe concussion. All of his bones would have been broken. You know,
Yeah, that's the thing. The guys that I saw survive it, their hips were shattered, their femurs were shattered. I mean,
Right.
they were in traction for months, probably.
Yeah. Back again, physics, right? Things in motion tend to stay in motion. One of the most basic laws is like we think of it like armor, like you're in a car with a seatbelt on, the car gets into an accident, the seatbelt stops you from going anywhere. But the seatbelt stops your physical body from moving too much, but then there's stuff inside your body that moves.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with powered armor, right? It's like you can have padding on the inside of the armor, which you have to have,
Well,
or your person will
it's not
be
just
killed.
the seatbelt anymore. You got the airbags.
Yeah, you got to have that for the person inside the armor,
Yeah.
and then you have to have stuff for things inside the person. So when the Raptor armor suits hit impact, and just like the Corsairs, they like spray out this gel that absorbs a lot of the impact on the inside to stop people from dying. But I mean, like, there's still the effect of like things inside your body moving, and I have no idea what the answer for that is, other than nano regeneration. You know,
Well, that's the thing about
Heck yeah.
Basically,
we're talking about things, zero G and just the fact that everything in space is in motion and things are also in motion relative to each other. So you could be, I mean, we like to bag in the expanse here on the show, but one of the
I
gimmicks,
think I'm the only one who likes to bag on it. You guys,
by the way,
you can blame me. It's okay. I mean, I'm sure the authors are awesome, and I'm sure
they're rich.
in real life.
that's why we can pick on them, right? We're
science
punching
is
up, we're not punching
crap.
down.
But
Right.
the one thing you said about Ceres, Jeff, it's what I thought it was. I mean, it's probably not entirely accurate, but people live on the interior.
That is never said in the book.
Well, I looked it up, and they live on the interior, and they spin the thing, and the interior shell has like layers of gravity. So the closer
That is never said in the book, though. I'm just saying that. I mean, I just read it.
Represent that either. The show just made it look like a city, but I mean, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
But where I was going with that is I did really like the convention of when they hit the slow zone. And it's like they've done such a point of like, this is the way zero G work, or this is the way, gravity works by the ships built like skyscrapers and whatnot.
Which
And
I
then,
totally dig. Like that.
like all of a sudden you got to remember the fact that we're all moving when we hit this immovable object in space. And I do remember a scene where basically like nobody expects it and like everything just stops. And like all the people in the ship like slam against the bulkheads and a whole bunch of people die.
Deep mist.
All of a sudden they just realize that, oh, we're still moving. Like we're moving in relation to something else.
Well, one of the reasons why the Interceptor has a secondary grav coil is because if the primary grav coil fails, even for a microsecond, at 540 gravities of acceleration,
everybody's dead.
Everybody's smear on the wall. You know what I mean? Like instantly turned into vapor from the heat transaction. And so if you're in space and I remember reading Moten God's Eye, and they had to accelerate at 3.5 Gs for 3 days, and everybody's like these special chairs, and because you're 3.5 times your weight, simply turning your head at that amount of gravities could break your neck. And the gravity is really interesting because it's at the same time it's really, really well like researched, and we still don't understand a lot of how it works, and we're still discovering new things about it all the time. And in the last book I wrote in Legacy, there is a battle that takes place between 5 different ships traveling at 5 different velocities in 5 different directions. And oh boy, I certainly used AI on that one, not to write it, but to do the math and be like, okay, ship's traveling at these coordinates, at this speed, at this velocity, at this acceleration, how long, et cetera, et cetera. Because part of the fun for me is getting all of that right. And I also had to do something that I've never seen done in a book before, never read in a book before, where it required a certain level of mathematical precision that was way beyond my level. And I wanted to make sure I got it right. And so gravity
That's why I always cheat.
Well, I like people to come away with thinking that I don't know what I'm doing. And then they go and they research it and they realize I do. It's like one of my favorite things. So the math in the end of that book is 100% right. I triple checked it, ran it by a physicist friend of mine. So yeah, but the gravity, it complicates everything. And it took 2 weeks to write 2,000 words because of that. So just bear that in mind when we're talking about like just cheat and have artificial gravity, that's why. Otherwise, you're going to end up in a situation where you have all of this other stuff you have to do. Plus, you have to have like, okay, this person weighs 180 pounds in 1G, but now it's 2Gs. How much do they weigh? Oh, now it's 0.8 Gs. How much do they weigh? What's their mass?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of books that had to deal with that. The hardest one was the Holy War books, because they don't have any artificial gravity other than spin gravity or acceleration, and you have to deal constantly with. I mean, I kind of fudged it with the bigger ships because they have the capacity to carry lots of reaction mass. But like the fighters, you're constantly thinking, okay, how much of their reaction mass have they run through? How long can they keep going? You know, it took so much calculation, so much Googling. It's so much easier writing space opera with like Taken to the Stars, where everything's kind of magic technology that the aliens discovered a long time ago.
I'm kind of going that route with my new series because it's focused more on one guy and his sort of infantry, powered armor sort of experience, where he's the only one with the power armor and then nobody else has it. And so I'm sort of going more of the like, since he's not a pilot and he's not in the Navy, I'm doing less with ships and that kind of thing, and more the other direction, just because I need
getting back to external fighting, like on asteroids and stuff. That's the thing, James brought it up. You have to remember when you're writing this that you're not just moving, the asteroid is moving pretty fast too. And if you have ships like that are trying to keep up or trying to dock on the asteroid, because it's not really landing on an asteroid for the most part, you kind of dock with it or rendezvous with it. It's a lot more complicated.
Slow down, move relative to it, and
Yeah.
then move to it. And the whole time it's moving and you have to adjust. One thing I wanted to bring up is that for me, extreme environments are also, it's just all about constraints, right? So when you're thinking about that thing, like one of the things I love to play with is bad equipment, or we're talking about, something awesome like a Raptor suit. But what if you have like the worst version of the Raptor, the previous version of the Raptor suit that kind of sucks? And so now we're using it in this environment, and the character has to think through like all the reasons. Like this is where you can really get into like the fun thinking through how the weapon works, like what the ballistics are, this is what I have, and how am I going to solve this problem against an enemy who's like maybe not smart, maybe equivalent smart as me, maybe their equipment's a little better than me. How can I use this extreme environment to take them on and win, right? And also, what does winning look like if maybe I can't win? Like maybe I have to win in some alternate way to accomplish my mission. That I think is really fun to like see how an author works through that, and do it yourself, because that for me that's the stuff that makes it interesting, and you can tell people really thought about it when they're doing that. I mean, all the work that Jeff has put into thinking about how the interceptor works, all the work that Josh has obviously put into like how the different implants work.
I wouldn't call it work, Bob.
I'd call it work. Absolutely call it work. I mean,
like I would do it anyways.
Yeah. But I mean,
the problem with doing a whole bunch of extra work, and this is why I say I try to go with the rule of cool rather than the science, because doing all the extra work, like, doing what I do with like a whole bunch of tech implants and technology in general and all of that, or playing with gravity and ships or extra fun, the more technical you get, the harder it is to maintain your own sense of reality in that space, because you don't live that life, right? So if you're writing characters that do a whole bunch of things that are extraordinary in terms of what our normal lives are, you really have to think about how you're writing the scene or the sequence, because if you're not incorporating those interesting things into your story, they're just you might as well not have them, right? It just changes.
Why it takes so long to write a book.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got like implants like I do, you really have to think: are they going to pick up the phone, or are they just going to think about it?
Josh?
Yeah.
I'm telling you, I know I shouldn't trust big tech, but the fact that dude can beat everybody at Call of Duty, I want that. I want that implant. The guy in real life,
Neuralink.
The real life guy who has the Neuralink, he plays Call of Duty and he beats everybody.
I hadn't heard
everybody. Nobody can beat him.
I hadn't heard about that.
No, yeah, he thinks about where he wants the shot to go, and it goes. He doesn't even have to. He doesn't have his reaction time is however
Now,
fast.
that's pretty
reaction time
legit.
is.
That's pretty legit.
I'll take that.
It's hilarious to me that when we get something like that, the first thing somebody uses it for is a video game.
Right.
The only thing that would be more hilarious is that they used it for porn. That's the only other
Right.
I mean, I'm sure that's coming.
It's funny. AI is taking care
so
of
to
that,
speak.
right?
Phrasing.
That is true.
Think of the drone operators that, I mean, I don't know, that's the next step. Like you'll just be in a couch in California controlling a drone somewhere else.
I just watched a thing about the Switchblade drone that the U.S. Army uses. You guys familiar with that?
Yeah.
It's like I think a 30-pound drone, maybe less. Fits in a backpack, and you take it out and you unfold it, and you control it from a device that's about yay big, and it can go up to 40 miles away and at 60 miles an hour. The anti-personnel version of it, and it can loiter for 15 minutes, and you control it with a device that's like this, and use your thumbs. Came out. It was issued to the Army in 2015, I think. In 2011, Call of Duty put it in their game, and then in 2014, they put it in the mobile version. And guess how you controlled it in the mobile version? This is before it was in the Army. You controlled it with your thumbs on a phone, on your phone, control the device. And Fat Electrician was talking about it, about how there's no way that the Army was just training the population for anybody who might actually end up joining the Army on how to use a drone that they hadn't even implemented yet, so that when they did implement it, everybody had already played Call of Duty and could use the drone.
Well, I think they realized when they made America's Army that, the video game from when did that come out, like 2000, I think. Why invest all this in a separate video game, which was very successful actually, but we've already got Call of Duty happening and all these other games happening, and I think there's submarines or the Navy uses Xbox 360 controllers for various applications.
For the periscopes.
Periscope, yeah. So everybody knows that interface. Why not use it?
And it's $25. Right.
What's
funny, what's interesting to me is that in a swinging this back to military sci-fi, because I got in this big argument a couple years ago at LibertyCon with people about this, is that video games train people to think a certain way and to do a certain sequence of events a certain way really, really well. Like really well. I know people who could get into a Tomcat and start it up because of DCS. It's 175 steps, but they have them
if
all.
If they could find a working Tomcat.
If you can find a working Tomcat. My point is assuming
I think there's one in Iran, because Tom Cruise.
He only took one of them. Yeah. Assuming the game is the technical aspect of the game is the same as the real world aspect. They don't get to teach them is the real world stuff. You don't have to teach them the procedures.
Oh, the problem is that
in the military, procedures is a lot of it.
But all these gamers that are so good at this, that's the problem. They can't pass a physical standard to get into the military.
You can teach somebody the physical standard a lot faster than you can teach somebody
maybe
the 175-point startup sequence for a Tomcat.
That seems to be a real problem right now.
That's changing, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you though. I mean, it's I don't like to be all conspiracy theory about it, but you wonder, what kind of input is the government putting into things like this, and maybe it's not even. It doesn't have to be a conspiracy theory. This is just the best way to do it, right? People want to play with this cool stuff in a video game. Call of Duty wants to be as realistic as possible. People love flight sims. Put that little mini game into Call of Duty of starting up a realistic weapon system.
Not to drag this kicking and screaming back to the topic, but
no. Yeah.
We don't do that here.
That brings to mind, if you're on one of these asteroids, having autonomous drones that are a lot lighter than you and a lot less sensitive to changes in acceleration would make a lot of sense. You launch one of those from your suit and use that to scout things out or as a guided weapon, unless of course the enemy has the ability to jam your signal.
Well, I just wrote a scene where the infantry launches a drone and they think they're going to get observation on their position, and the first thing the enemy does is blow it up. So it's just leading up to that, you think you're going to have it, and then no, let's take that away.
Well, it might make sense, although it seems retro. In that situation, it might make sense when you've got microgravity and bulk isn't as big of a thing to actually have a wire guided drone.
Yeah.
And you think also got to remember too is like, and this always comes to play, and you guys were talking about this last week, is logistics. How many of these drones do you have? You know, are you going to get any more? How long are you? How much time are you from?
Can you make new ones
resupply?
with the fabricator on your ship?
Yeah,
Right.
and that always comes into play is when you're talking about space, and especially fighting on a. Do you use ammo for your weapons? How much ammo do you have? How much does it weigh? Can you get more? Do you
What
use
you
direct
have is what
energy
you have,
weapons? How are you dealing with the heat buildup? You know, stuff like that. It's just it's a lot to think about, but it's also what makes it military sci-fi and not just space opera.
Yeah, absolutely.
With the Drop Trooper series, when they went off in another part of the galaxy, they were cut off from resupply of anything except for raw materials for ever, and they had to like switch out their weapons to things that they could fabricate. Like they had this pulse guns that some of their shuttles and things had this rotary cannon basically that fired lasing cartridges. That self-consuming thermal cartridges that went through a laser, like a barrel that's basically a solid lasing rod. So it looked really cool, and it's basically like a 20 millimeter laser Vulcan. But they couldn't make that ammo out there. They didn't have the raw materials for it. So, and they didn't have anything they could fabricate. So they had to switch it all out to something basic that they could make, like a coil gun, you know?
I remember talking. I used to sit next to a guy who was underwater demo team guy, and when I worked for the university, no, excuse me, when I worked for the state of Alaska Department of Health and Welfare, and he told me that he was the stoner guy. He carried a stoner, but all his
I thought
buddies.
you were saying he was a stoner.
No, he carried the stoner arms, the precursor to the
M63.
And he, but everybody else on his UDD team carried AK-47s because they could always get ammo for AK-47s because they'd be out in the field for weeks or months at a time, and it was just easier to take ammo off the dead than it was to wait for a resupply for the M16s or whatever they were using at the time. And that's certainly something to think about.
Like CAR-15 carbines, whatever they call them.
Yeah, and that's certainly something to think about, because you don't want to be like, oh, have a reader point out like, oh, hey, so your guys have unlimited ammo, is that it? And you'd be like, no, they do not have unlimited ammo. They have replicators in their suits that make them. Yeah.
That would be a big suit if you had a fabricator in your suit.
Well, I know the guys who do our buddies over at Wargate, they have this whole premise for their fantasy book series.
Yeah, I've read that.
Fantasy book series where, like, the only rule is that wherever they end up in the future or in the alternate world is that there's some sort of magical relic that will duplicate the stuff, so that they don't have to worry about talking about logistics, in their books. And personally, it's gonna sound really weird, but like, logistics is cool to talk about in military sci-fi,
And also, the one thing that bugged me about that the first time I read it, it wasn't magic, it was some kind of technology, the first one they wrote. But it's like, if you have that kind of technology, why are you still using like M16s or
because it can only replicate whatever you put on it. It can't.
Yeah, I know, but why? If they made that to begin with, why don't they have more?
Oh, they didn't make it. They found it. That's the whole
okay.
thing. It's like they show up in this alternate version of the future, and there's this altar, and it, I know this because I talked to Walt about writing one, because I had a really cool idea for F-14s fighting dragons. I thought would be awesome. So 1980s aircraft carrier goes into this fantasy world and has to rescue everybody.
It's like the final countdown goes
final
to
countdown, but with dragons, right? Awesome. And that's what they said I had to have, was a altar that replicated whatever you put on it. So
you could have a sea altar. Why wouldn't that work? Like, right?
And then
I used that idea kind of, not fantasy wise, but in my first series, Duty on Our Planet, when the Russians when the Russians escape Earth through that wormhole they discover, they go to this alien planet and they find this alien facility, and the only thing there that still works is basically a replicator. You put something on this and it makes more of it.
Huh. I mean, then you'd have to steal we got to steal all their ammo. Like we got to break into their ammo depot and steal all of it, so they
Right.
can't replicate anything. And then there's
So I mean, like you can totally ignore logistics if you want to, and you can ignore all the physics of asteroids and stuff like that. But the more of that stuff that you ignore, the further away you get from military sci-fi, and the more you get to space opera. And there's nothing wrong with that. Just don't try to sell it as military sci-fi, because the number of people who talk to me about how, like, oh Jeff, I love that you mentioned X, Y, and Z when your guys are traveling on their ship. Like, they have food stores. And one time the food stores gets hit during a battle, and now they have less food, and it's 3 weeks back to base, and they have 2 weeks of food. Just like in a submarine or
eat
a
each other.
sea. Eating each other. Josh, you do a lot of special forces stuff where they go into like weird environments. What are some of the stuff that you do logistics wise that would, or any wise that would, help them fight in extreme environments?
Well, in weaponized, a lot of the with the exception of the first mission, which is a disaster and a failure, a lot of their equipment gains and what they're using is stuff that they're piecing together along the way. Either they're scrounging from like secondhand arms dealers, or they're finding along the way. And I I purposely did that because I wanted the I wanted the group to be able to operate on their own without any kind of logistics trail. If you've got spies or special forces operating overseas, obviously you're going to have to figure out how to supply them, either airdrops or whatever it is, even, and they're not going to operate for that long by themselves. You know what I mean? Like, even special forces operate in the desert, like they go out for, a couple of weeks, let's just say, but they either still have to come back or figure out a way to chopper in or airdrop in supplies. And in a intergalactic setting, it's not very reasonable to be able to get a hold of that kind of a logistics chain and make it functional. And so one of the characters who's been operating on his own for years has kind of a network of different places that he can go to that he knows, um, where they can get stuff. Because the best logistics chain is a lot of money and the ability to spend it. And so this particular character, he's been doing this for a long time, but he's also funded by a government agency. And so not only does he have his own money, but he's got basically a government credit card that doesn't look like a government credit card that he can, go and buy these things. So a lot of what they use, they scrounge when they know they need it. Because if you're a special forces team and you're going into the jungle, you're going to have, that kind of gear. But if you need to immediately transition to, say, a desert environment or a cold weather environment, you may not have those things. You may have to work out how to get it. And then what do you do with all the other stuff? And so for this, they're not, carrying around a bunch of supplies. They don't need a big ship that carries gear for every conceivable environment. They just go and do almost like, well, I think I've said it before. It's kind of like Mission Impossible in space, that really detached NOC level operation where they just go in and they figure out what they're going to do, and then they figure out what they need to do it in. Now, a lot of times that doesn't work in their favor, but that's kind of the fun of the story.
You said you said the thing about the government credit card, and I immediately thought of Clear and Present Danger, where he's like, "Oh, would you take a company check?" And it's
right,
like deputy
right.
director of the CIA,
Yeah, yeah, and he goes, yes, and then yeah. So and honestly, I don't know that I've tackled logistics in a big way when it comes to the military operations that I've done. But specifically to creating uh, kind of hazardous environments or interesting environments, that's one of the big things that I'm trying to do with Weaponized, is have really big, intricate set pieces um, instead of just doing like a planet side landing or something like that we've seen before. Just trying to change it up a little bit and make it interesting, like doing the hollowed out asteroid scene with kind of a different setup and figuring out the best way to do that, and then what could go wrong, and then having them kind of have to figure it out as they go, because they're not a fully kitted out spec ops team. And those kind of limitations are actually really fun to work with, because then you well, as a rider, you're not limited to the gear that you've given your men. You know what I mean? Like, they can just, part of one of the characters is that he is technically a criminal. And so he can go and he can deal with smugglers. He can deal with arms dealers. He can steal his own crap if he wants to. The interesting dynamic between his character and the soldier character, who's obviously not on board with all of that shenanigan type operations.
I call shenanigans on this operation.
Yeah. Next person to say shenanigans.
A sports party like
really
the Irish themed one.
It is really fun coming up with new interesting situations to put people in and figure out how to get out of them. And that plays part that's key to any story, whether it's in a hazardous environment or just on a planet somewhere, is making it interesting and then figuring out how to make your characters solve it in interesting ways. That's part of the fun of writing, I think.
I mean, we're cheating a little bit. Like, asteroids are actually not nearly as extreme as you could get. I mean, a methane-based environment. Let's go fight on the surface.
So the most hazardous environment I ever had in any of my stories is I had people on the outside of a starship while it was in basically hyperspace.
Oh, that's cool.
The only thing separating the ship from this totally different universe that it could not exist in otherwise is this narrow field that only goes up about 2 meters off the ship. So if you're on the ship with like magnetic grapples in a spacesuit, and if you accidentally push away from the ship more than 2 meters, you cease to exist. You're not even atoms. Nice. You're just like subatomic particles in a different universe. And that was amazing. Interesting.
That seems
also because the ship is in this transition space, and like I said, they have gravity in transition space, so that gravity also extends to the outside of the ship. So you are being pulled downward towards the end of the ship by the artificial gravity while you're walking on the outside of the ship with magnetic grapples.
That's awesome. I did a thing in Know Thy Enemy where they had like a black hole and a sun, and at the right appropriate distance between the black hole and the sun was a planet that was caught in both gravity wells to the point where it had stopped going around orbiting the sun, and it was just held still. It still rotated, but it didn't move because of the gravity of the black hole was slowly sucking it in. And so to get to the planet, you had to exceed the gravity of both the sun and the black hole. And then if you left any further from the planet, any distance from the planet, a certain distance, you had to be accelerating a certain gravity to escape. And you could not turn around. You couldn't stop and turn around, because if your acceleration dropped below the threshold of the black hole, it would suck you in and you'd be dead. You would never be able to escape it. And so then when they landed on that planet, it's like all the water had been evaporated off the planet because of the extremeness of the situation, and it was basically a planet that was slowly breaking apart. And
I would love to do a black hole scene. I picture from Interstellar, that really cool looking black hole backdrop.
That was actually that black hole picture you see everywhere was kind of the inspiration for that whole.
Well, you screw up and you're stuck in what is it, redshift or wherever, where you're, all of a sudden your time slows down relative to everybody else, and now you're just stuck there.
Right.
So,
I mean, for you it seems like whatever, but for everybody else it's forever. So one another reason why I hated that movie so much was because, like, why would you ever go down to that planet? An hour there is like 7 years. Okay, well, let's go down and see what happened, even though they were only there.
It seems like a good idea.
The thing is, you're looking for a new home for humanity. Why would humanity live on a planet that has a black hole nearby? It's like really dangerous.
Really cool.
Doesn't seem like the best use of resources.
That
He
was the
really
rule
wanted to
of
get that
dumb. There
image
was
of black
four of the
hole.
smartest people supposedly on the planet, and they all made the decision to go down to a planet that was stuck in a gravity well of a black hole. They knew the time dilation would happen. And then they act shocked when they come back up and it's been 20 years. Like, oh, I'm so sorry. You had to stay up here for 20 years by yourself. Well,
Sorry.
what did you think was going to happen?
And what was that guy doing for 20
Exactly.
years? Like,
There's like a whole
I'd
other
have been
movie of
like,
that guy
hey,
just like hanging out,
I got a mission. I gotta go, bro. See ya.
playing a lot of chess with himself.
The movie was so dumb. Another movie that gets praised for its hard sci-fi that is just the dumbest movie.
Well, it's not. It's not. The science in it is not totally unfeasible, but just there's a lot of stupid pills being taken in that
Right.
movie.
It's highly theoretical, I guess.
Sometimes I'll watch a movie like that
Yeah.
or read a military sci-fi book, and my first thought is, have you ever watched or read sci-fi that was written before you were born in your entire life? Because these ideas have been explored ad nauseum by people who are much better at it than you or I. And so, like, the whole idea of time dilation and the whole idea of robots, getting their own intelligence, or all of that was done decades ago. And so when you come in and you're trying to reinvent the wheel without having seen a wheel, it just comes off as stupid.
I mean, I'll also say there's
I'll tell you
been
one of
shock
the
forever. Like, do you guys remember this show, Galactica 1980, which was Battlestar Galactica, but they come
Were we
to
just talking about that?
Unfortunately, I
We
do
just talked
remember
about
that.
I found
Not
it.
today,
I
but I
watched
mean, like, we talked about it at some point recently.
Okay, I don't know. I found it, and I was watching the first episode last night, and it was like unlocking all these memories of like they're riding motorcycles that take
Why
off.
you'd forgot it?
Apparently, I did, but then I remembered it. It's like, oh yeah, this crap has existed forever.
Yeah. So
One of
it's
the
just, you know,
time dilation and going through black holes and time travel and all that. It's interesting, and really the only movie that I've ever wanted to go deeper in after was Sphere, and I mean it's way different from the books, but they
I read the
set so
book. I
much
never
cool
saw the
thing.
movie.
It's not like extremely different from the book, but it is different, but that was the only story where I was like, man, it was really well done, and it really didn't have anything to do with uh how they got there or anything like that, but just the why is the spaceship from the future like I want to know all of this stuff. Like
Huh.
it's super interesting, and then they just forget it all, and I'm like, no, I want to know
I
why.
know. That's another one where he put that story in an extreme environment that played into, the effects
Yeah.
of the characters. But
Yeah.
yeah, there was a lot of that I really just want to know more about. And
Have any of y'all written an extreme environment that's not like an out in space, something like the bottom of an ocean or
I wrote a scene that took place, well, a whole sequence on Europa, like under the ice in Europa.
yeah? I
And
was
that
about to say
was,
ice planet would be
yeah.
cool.
Well, the thing that I've kind of forgotten about, I was really thinking about like Earth under the water, but Europa just has basically, it doesn't have the same pressure the Earth does. So even though you're under the ice, underwater, it's not the same pressure environment
How
as,
much pressure is it?
I can't remember it's like. It was close to one Earth gravity, like if I remember the math right. It really
So
was.
even if you're like deep under the water, but you're feeling the same pressure as one atmosphere, that's
If
kind
I
of
remember,
cool.
if I remember correctly, it was not. It's not nearly as dangerous as being at the same depth.
So we could like build a colony under like
Yeah,
deep under the water in Europa and not have to worry about
and
pressure.
that's what I had was basically a research station that was under the ice, and so they went down to that location, and then I wrote a fight scene, basically these crab-like mechs fighting in underwater, and I mean the whole thing was just fun to because I learned a ton about that. I should be able to say more off the top of my head, but it's been like 3 years since I wrote it. But that was a fun.
I wrote one scene in, I guess it was the first Birthright book. It took place on a moon that had um, an atmosphere that was like corrosive, and it had like hydrogen sulfide or something like that, or no, hydrochloric acid oceans,
Hmm.
and the air was like chlorine, and eventually there was a fight at the end, and these two enhanced commandos, or actually two human enhanced commandos and an alien cyborg, are fighting out there without spacesuits.
Oh, they're just disintegrating.
And well, they're not disintegrating because they have all this, this enhancement, but they're holding their breath, they're keeping their oxygen inside, but eventually one of them, the bad guy, tries to breathe and all the chlorine goes in and he doesn't die immediately, but it starts eating away at his mucous
Like,
membranes, and then he winds up being kicked into the ocean of hydrochloric acid.
That probably did the trick.
Yeah. Only he done his
And then we got the Joker.
Yeah.
It's important to remember when you're doing extreme environments, just try to really think it out. Like, really like how would this battle happen on Earth? Now let's take away all the things that keep us alive without us even thinking about it and try to build that environment up from the ground up and how everybody would deal with it and what you would need to look at. And the more you do that, you don't necessarily have to explain all that to the reader, but the more you do that, the more you'll have like a really cool, realistic battle sequence in an environment that seems like the most inhospitable thing ever. And people will love it. People love it. But if you
Even
fake
realistic,
not
is
so much.
understandable. Like follow the rules that you set up. It doesn't necessarily have to be realistic completely, but
Like you don't do the hard sci-fi. Just set up your rules, foreshadow them, follow the rules.
Internal consistency is the
Yeah.
key.
there it is.
Absolutely. And if you read all of our works, like 90% of everything we do is very internally consistent.
That's what people I hear people like bag on anybody who criticizes some Star Wars movie for something in there, and they're like, oh, well, it's all made up, it's just fantasy. But no, internal consistency is the problem. If you're not internally consistent, then you deserve all the criticism. You get like the whole thing fuel in The Last Jedi, but they hadn't mentioned fuel in 7
Ever.
movies until then, and now
Right.
suddenly there's fuel.
Midichlorians.
And they changed the way hyperspace worked all of a sudden.
The
And
force is powered by
it's-
midichlorians.
And then idiots come out and say, oh, well, it's all just a science fiction, made up fantasy. Yeah, but you made up the rules. You have to live by those rules.
Live by the rules, die by the rules.
Die by the rules.
Right.
All right. Well, hey, let us know what's the coolest extreme environment that you've read about or seen in a movie. We'd love to hear about it. Let us know in the comments and come
And
check
let
us
us
out.
know if you want me to shave this.
No.
Yes.
No.
The answer is no. The answer is no.
Compliment
Let us know.
Rick's beard. Let him know how cool he looks, so he can move forward with a
Call
goal.
him a hobo.
No,
Yeah, there you go.
no.
Oh,
Rick
that's
is not a
offensive.
hobo.
You actually look better when it was a little bit thinner. It's now starting to look more, 1960s grok kind of thing.
Grok?
You're gonna write some poetry.
Who's Grok?
You ever see oh gosh, what's that old black and white television show? Had the dude with the beret and the black goatee.
Oh,
You talking about like Dobie Gillis?
yes,
Toby Gillis.
That's not Grok.
but he had that friend who was all like,
Yeah, his name was not Grok.
No, but you know what I mean. He looked like a hippie. How
You're
about
just making
that?
stuff up now, Jeff.
You look like a hippie.
That was Bob Denver's character on Dobie Gillis.
Yeah, I love that show. I used to watch it every night. All right.
Dang. All right. Well, hey, thanks for hanging out with us. We'll see you guys later.
Come on, Rick.